All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Stephanie Johnson. I'm the Director of Education at ASBO International. And today we are kicking off a Working Together webinar hosted alongside Educating All Learners Alliance. And these Working Together webinars give us a chance to learn from other organizations where we can pool all of our knowledge and expertise into one time and place to share with one another. In order to receive Cpe Credit, you must be logged in for at least 50 minutes and answer 3 of the polling questions throughout the webinar. And you must also complete the webinar evaluation located in the online course at the conclusion of the session. So if you are not familiar with ASBO, we are the Association of School Business Officials International, and we're committed to providing programs and services that promote the highest standards of school business management and professional growth, as well as the effective use of educational resources. So we are the voice of school business officials and the place that they can come to get resources and connect and network with each other. So that's a little bit about who ASBO is, and I have the privilege of introducing 2 of our members today who are joining us. So we have your moderator, Sharie Lewis, who is the Director of Business Services and Operations from Parkrose School District in Portland, Oregon. Great to have you with us, Sharie. And we also have a panelist, Brian O'Keefe, Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Chief School Business Official at Arbor Park School District in Oak Forest, Illinois. So we'll get a chance to hear from them in just a few moments. And thank you both so much for being with us today. So now I'm going to turn it over to Gabrielle, who will share a little bit about ELL.
Thank you. So I also wanted to introduce 2 more of our speakers who are joining us today who are a part of ELL. So the first one is Lindsay Kubatzky, who's the Policy Manager at the National Center for Learning Disabilities, or Ncld. And we also have Daly joining us, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Brooklyn Laboratory Charter Schools. Now, both of these organizations are founding members of the Educating All Learners Alliance, who I'll share with you now. And so the Educating All Learners Alliance, or again, ELL, as we like to call it, is an alliance of over 70 partner organizations. And the alliance was started in response to COVID-19 with the goal of supporting best practices in the field of special education to support educators and students with disabilities. So we have a resource library. We partner with organizations such as ASBO International to share webinars such as this one. And so, yeah, we're excited to partner today. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Sharie Lewis to share some of our objectives for today's session.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I'm glad you're here. Objectives. So some of the things that we want to think about is we want to be able to identify special education and some of the ELL challenges and compliance laws. I'm a law guru. I read law for fun instead of regular books. And it's important to understand compliance as it is to a school district and how it deals to students, because sometimes we all mean and want things, but there are rules that we have to follow whether you like it or not. And what are some of the budget challenges that we have? As you have some of the educators and people that are in school districts that we have on this panel, they're going to tell you some of the challenges that we have, along with myself, of how we get enough money to ensure that we're providing that adequate services for those kids. And then we provide services, but without the teachers in the facilities, what are we doing to identify what we need in those facilities and with teachers to ensure that we have the resources? So those are some of the things that we want to discuss in this webinar. And I'll show one of the reasons why I'm here. I spent 12 years as a special education student, and I understand and know how challenging it was as a student to get some of the education that I felt that was necessary. That's why I am extremely passionate about special education, and I try to teach special education law every year at the ASBO conference.
And real quick, if we could pop back into poll question 1, just to ask our audience, what are your foremost challenges in providing education for special needs and ELL students throughout COVID-19? And you can check all that apply.
Okay, we got a couple more seconds before we're going to close the poll and we're going to share the results.
All right, wow, so it looks like most of you definitely are dealing with the equity for learners piece. So thank you for sharing, and presenters, it'll be good for you to see where everyone's at as we move forward for the presentation. All right, so back over to you, Lindsay. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's great. It was really great to see all those answers. And so, yeah, I'm excited to be here and share a little bit about the work that Ncld does and give a little context to the webinar and jump in when I can on some of the questions later on. So Ncld, the National Center for Learning Disability, its mission is to improve the lives of 1 in 5 children with learning and attention issues. So these include things like dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, but also things like ADHD. And so for more than 40 years, we've been an advocacy organization that works mostly at the federal level to try to advance special education policies and general education policies to support students with disabilities. So I would love to ask the second poll question about what year IDEA was first passed. It was initially known as the Education for All Handicapped Children.
Okay, we'll give a couple more seconds for everyone to finish up their answers and I'll share the results.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like most of you got it correct. So IDEA was initially passed in 1975. This was just a couple years after the initial Americans with Disabilities Act was passed. So if we could go ahead to the next slide, I can talk a little bit about the history of inclusion. Sorry, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, not the ADA. The ADA was later passed in 1990. So before IDEA, there were a lot of state laws that prohibited children with disabilities from even attending public schools. And so I was just talking with my mom the other day, and she was in school in 1975, and she was talking about how many of her classmates, or hardly any of her classmates had disabilities that she was aware of, and that many of them were segregated and not in general education classrooms. So the first law, the Rehabilitation Act, was really a non-discriminatory act, and so it prohibited discrimination based on disability. But then in 1975, IDEA was passed, as many of you have identified, and that was really about access and inclusion of students with disabilities into the general education and public school system. And so later on, the ADA was passed. That's a sort of an update to the Rehabilitation Act. And this was also about access, and it provided protections under the law for individuals with disabilities. And then in 2001, NCLB was passed. This was a reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that was passed in the 60s. And this was the first time that the federal government recognized that we need to look at different subgroups of populations and the performance that they their performance as compared to their peers. And so this was the first time we were really able to see a subgroup of students with disabilities and how they were performing compared to their general education peers. And at this time, more than 70% of children with learning disabilities and ADHD spent most of their time in general education classrooms. And so we were really excited about that law because it finally showed that there's it finally publicly showed that there's a great disparity between students with disabilities and their non-disabled peers and how we're performing, or how we're educating those students. And then there was a reauthorization of NCLB, which was the Every Student Succeeds Act. That was just a few years ago. And it kept the provisions under NCLB of holding schools in subgroups, schools accountable for the performance of different subgroups. And so I want to talk a little bit about what IDEA requires and what the federal government has said recently in light of COVID-19. So as many of you know, it was first passed in 1975 and has been updated a few times, but the main provisions under IDEA is to provide a free and public education, or FAPE, to all children with disabilities. And it also gives parents rights under the law to provide additional services and supports for students with disabilities, and to have legal access to legal recourse if those services are not being upheld. And so right now there's about $12 billion of federal funds that go to schools and districts around the country to support students with disabilities. Most importantly, during the pandemic, the federal government has not granted any sort of substantial waivers on what schools and districts are required to provide under the law. So there was some talk early during the pandemic that schools and districts may have a waiver on some of the provisions and protections under IDEA, but Secretary DeVos was initially considering it, but ultimately recommended to Congress to not issue any waivers. And so schools and districts are required to uphold and abide by all federal special education laws for the most part, and in particular for the protections that students with disabilities are most impacted by. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the resources that Ncld has created. So we have an Planning for Equity and Inclusion Guide. That's a guide to reopen schools equitable and inclusively. And then we also have a few other guides around technology. And so there's one that we created with ASBO, among others, that's inclusive technology during the COVID-19 pandemic. And that talks a bit about the procurement process and things like that. And then there's also student privacy issues and what educators should know about privacy issues such as FERPA and things like that. And then we also have a brief overview of relevant laws and best practices on accessibility and technology during the pandemic. And finally, we created a document with another ELA partner, the National Center for Special Education in Charter Schools, and that discussed some of the discipline issues that we might face during this pandemic and how those disproportionately impact students with disabilities and students of color. And so those are just a few of the resources that we provide, and I'd love to provide a little more context and feedback as we go along with the Q&A, and I can jump in as sort of the disability rights perspective as we go through this webinar. So thanks for very much for having me, and look forward to a robust conversation.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. That was great. I always like talking about law. It's one of my favorite subjects. And don't go fall asleep, that's not fair. Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask the school business officials that are actually in the schools pretty much, and then maybe Lindsay, to do some Q&A at this point and discuss some of the questions that we kind of put forth that we think that may help us better understand some of the challenges. Brian, what do you think is the foremost budget challenge related to special education and ELL students and staffing?
In my experience, and I'll get into my district a bit here just to give some folks perspective, but it's really the unknown. So when you're building a budget, or when you have your Board of Education pass a budget, those are the expenditures and revenues that you expect to come in the door. When somebody moves into the district that has maybe some severe special needs, whether it be from a physical or mental standpoint, or from a emerging bilingual standpoint, not having dollars allocated to those situations are really, that's the thing that gives you the heart palpitations when you're a chief school business official, because you know you have a set budget, you have the expectation of what you're going to spend, and all of a sudden one student necessarily may not break it, but all of a sudden if there's an influx of students that have highly special needs that cannot fit into programs that you already have built, that are, or have to be sent to programs that are extremely expensive in state or out of state, that's where we start getting really seriously concerned about what the budget looks like. And it's not because we don't want to spend the money. Our responsibility is to educate every student in the best manner that we can. It's the unknowns that pop up during the year that may have a negative impact on your budget, or in some cases may require you to adjust and actually submit an updated version of your budget to the Board of Education and to the state. And that can happen really in two ways. It can happen either when you're going through registration, as we do early in the spring, and get an advanced understanding of who might be coming into the district. But if people don't participate in a timely fashion, that can hurt. Or like I said, the first time around, somebody moves into the district after your budget's already set and solidified. Our responsibility is to make sure we do what we can on their behalf. But it can be challenging on the budget side when you're trying to tell or explain to the Board of Education why you're 20, 50, 100% over budget in a certain area, and then get them to understand what that means and know that it's doing the right thing for kids, but there might be an additional process involved, like an amended budget, that we have to go through in order to serve the needs of those kids.
Great response. Erin, thinking on your side, being the charter school, what is the difference in the challenges that Brian was talking that you have to deal with on a charter school?
Yeah, so thank you. And I think that for us in New York City, whatever students we get with disabilities, our funding mechanism is the same. And so although we may budget one thing, we do still have the ability to submit to the city and state the amended numbers, and we receive funding for that. Where I think our most challenging issues as it relates to operating and serving need is staffing, is our human resource. And it's making sure that you have the right people to work with the most diverse group of students you possibly can, regardless of disability, regardless of English language learners. And I think that the hard part for us is recruiting the right people, not knowing who's coming into our doors every year, and then making sure that we give them the right training, the right support, the right resources in order to educate those students.
Fantastic. That leads on to my next question. What a good segue into that one. So as we think about that, what we just, Brian and you talked about, but that staffing is, we can't do our jobs and we can't help those students if I don't have somebody to teach it. So what are some of the barriers in the pandemic about staffing? As we think about, as we've all seen, CDC says this, our unions want this, and we all go to bargaining either every other year or every 3 years, or we may not have bargaining. What are some of those challenges? And they're legal wise, Lindsay, so you can chime in on this one, but where do you think that hits you, Erin?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've been operating in person since the end of August. And some of our challenges as it relates to staffing is definitely staff members' unwillingness to come in to serve our students in person. And their unwillingness is for various reasons. It's not because they don't want to in terms of educating our students, but there's some real fears and concerns that they've had as it relates to the pandemic and making sure that their workplace is protecting them from, COVID-19. And so it's been a challenging process to make sure, one, we're hearing, people have some medical concerns. And so we've had a process where we clearly identify accommodations and or exceptions. And then from there, we had to make sure that we had the right staff and enough staff to educate our students in person. And the challenge with that is their unease of coming into a physical work location with the pandemic going through its highs and its lows. And I'll speak more about that as we get into my presentation, but that's been our challenge of how to balance what's right for staff, but also knowing that we've chosen to educate our leaders, our doctors, our future through our students.
Okay. Brian, on the different side, what do you feel when we think about teachers? And we also know, as we've all been reading the paper in Illinois, that we have one of the biggest challenges with teachers' unions. How are you confronting those in your school district?
We've been very fortunate. Arbor Park School District is a pre-K through 8 elementary district that's been around for 100 years. But there was a strike 40 years ago, and there's still some banter in the hallways about that strike with some of the seriously old not in terms of age, but experienced folks that have been around the district for a long period of time. So there's a new president with our union. We've spent a lot of time with that individual over the last 2 years, just building a relationship and making sure that what we know and what we see and what we hear is being shared equally with that individual, so that there's a clearer understanding of how the district is operating, why our superintendent or myself or our Board of Education is making decisions, and what research background information we have available to us that's helping us make those decisions. So for example, we had planned on, state of Illinois is a different type of state. We can all say that about every one of our states, but Illinois is a little unique in terms of its overall governance and the amount of overall local governments that there is. So in the state of Illinois, there's more than 7,000 local governments. That includes school districts, municipalities, cities, townships, stuff like that. So there's a lot of local control in the state of Illinois. And from our perspective, we were ready to start the school year with about a third of our population in person. And that was a choice that we gave to our parents. And then the Illinois Department of Public Health came out within a week before we were supposed to start saying, every nurse that works with a student must have a fitted N95 mask. Every custodian who is working in a student-driven area must have a fitted N95 mask. And we didn't have the time to put it together in order to be ready for what was literally less than a week of time. So we reached out to our union representation, let them know what the plan was, that we were flexible because we're a smaller district, so we can be flexible on the dime. So all of our kids were remote, special ed kids, everybody were remote, all with one-to-one access at the start of the school year. We brought back a group of kids in October and had to have a lot of conversations with our staff, just like Aaron mentioned. If you're not comfortable being in the building, why? Is it a medical reason? Because if it is, and we have some information from your doctor, we certainly want to make a good decision on behalf of the human being. If it's because you're not sure how we clean, you're not sure that your space is safe, let's talk about that and find out what it means to have a clean and safe space, what we're doing consistently day in, day out, and then what considerations you might have. So an example of that would be, we had a few folks say, we want the district to buy our own air cleaners or humidifiers or dehumidifiers for our rooms. They said, and we said, well, the district is not going to incur that expense. But you're welcome, if it makes you more comfortable inside your own space, to bring that device yourself. And in the end, we actually have built into our contract too, where our teachers, all of our certified staff gets $200 to use on classroom supplies each year, and we reimburse them towards the end of the year. We said, if you want to use some of your $200, then we can be flexible that way too. So we've had to be, I think what this past 10 plus months has taught us as educators is that we probably thought we were really, really flexible when it came to educating our kids and doing the right things on human beings. I think we've learned that true flexibility and doing the right thing for human beings, we probably didn't do as much as we could in the past. But the past 10 months, the most recent 10 months, we've had to make good decisions that positively impact staff and students at the same time. It's one conversation, not breaking the conversation into two.
Okay. Fabulous. Now, Lindsay, I'm going to take a different approach, knowing that I love law. So as you hear some of the challenges that you see these two wonderful school business officials talking of what they think of the challenges, whether it be getting the stuff they need for the students or the staff, or what are the budget things, what is on the legal side that you're saying in your mind, pesky, going, well, you need to think about this, you need to think about that. What are those things that you're hearing in this that somebody else, we need to hear from you that maybe we're missing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think one thing that we're concerned about is we talked about that history of inclusion and how students with disabilities were previously segregated in schools and not allowed in public schools. What we're a little concerned about is that if we bring in just students with disabilities, that's a modern day segregation that we're a little concerned about. And so it's not providing education that is the most inclusive if we're segregating students with disabilities. And I think we're a little concerned that students with disabilities often have medical issues that make them more vulnerable to the virus. So I think one thing that we have been really pushing for is to make sure that there is a safe and equitable environment, but also that there are opportunities for parents to stay engaged and to be involved in the process, in decision-making process. So that's part of the law, is that parents need a voice and decision-making authority during how the school and district educates their child. And so if they're not involved in the process, I think that's a really big issue for us.
Fabulous. So I'm going to add my little senses, and I have a different role being the legislative chair for ASBO and advocating for special education, and I've been doing it for a very long time. It's my passion. And some of the challenges, and I think Brian and Aaron will tell you, it's called maintenance of effort. And not a lot of people understand maintenance of effort, but the challenges that school business officials have is we're providing the care. It's the delivery model of how we're doing it that may be the challenge. For example, I'm not hiring outside people to transport students because there's no students to transport, right? So is that going to affect my maintenance of effort? I can't create money. I'd love to. I'd be very rich if I did that. But as we do that in the world of education, how do I continue to meet maintenance of effort? Which is one of the federal laws that we have to do. There is no if, no ands, no buts. There's basically 4 criteria. If you don't meet them, what happens? So one of the things that we're putting forth in ASBO is looking at the maintenance of effort criteria on fiscal guidelines to give us a waiver so we still provide the services, which is one of the things that when we looked about it, we know we got to provide the services, which is why Ms. DeVos said, I'm not going for any changes in special education. You're going to be providing the services regardless. We're not denying that. What the thing that Brian and Aaron and I need is some flexibility on the fiscal part so we can still ensure that we don't have to give up current service level to pay back money that we have to provide for services that we already have been provided. So those are some of the flexibilities or some of the challenges I think Brian and Aaron are dealing with when we think about special education that a lot of people don't understand. So think about that. So as we talk about, and we've got some more time, what are some of the things around enrollment and capacity that you're dealing with, Aaron, that you think somebody should know, not only as a charter school, but if you think of it how is enrollment projected for you? Are you guaranteed you're going to get those 50 kids?
Yeah, and so in New York City, there's estimates that we've lost as a whole upwards of 100,000, 200,000 students, where families, of course, in an urban environment, are saying, you know what, I'm going to live with a family member. I'm going to exit the city to have more space, so to decrease the likelihood of getting COVID-19. And so I think all schools throughout New York City have really struggled with enrollment. And for us, when we built numbers based on, historical data and what we've done last year, we've struggled with enrollment as well. And so it, with our enrollment directly results into a loss of dollars. And so the balance between serving our highest need students at the same time of balancing a budget is real, and there are sacrifices that we have to make in order to really fulfill our mission.
Well, Aaron, how do you then educate your public on what that means?
Yeah, so I think that, ever since the pandemic hit, it's really important that you engage your stakeholders, your board, your school district, your parents, your students, your faculty, and really be transparent in what COVID-19 has created, not just in terms of fear for getting sick and death, but a real loss in income for not only school districts, but also for families. And then how you're responding to those social and emotional needs that those families are having. And most of the time it's financial. And so it's really honest town halls and conversations around some of the things that school districts are dealing with.
Thank you. That's fabulous. So, Brian, I'm going to pick your brain. How are you dealing with that enrollment guess? And how are you educating the stakeholders, being the board or the public, on what that guess might be?
Sure. It's good to piggyback off Aaron, because we're in different parts of the country, but we see many of this, either see, feel, or deal with many of the same issues. Well, Oak Forest and Tinley Park, which is, we've got most of Oak Forest, again, South Cook County, state of Illinois. We're a bedroom community, but we're landlocked. And 40% of our district boundaries, with 40% within our district boundaries, are comprised of Cook County Forest Preserves or Cook County Public Golf Course. So we don't have a lot of movement. Our mobility rate is less than 10%, but we don't have a lot of year in, year out new construction because we are landlocked. And this is a low end, middle income area. So there's not a lot of remodels being done either. So we really look at it in a couple ways. I've got a good relationship with the village of Tinley Park and the city of Oak Forest, and I talk to them a couple times a year about things that are happening that may actually impact the school district in terms of new students coming in. So we have to understand what's happening within our community. We have to understand what's happening within the community that's already here. So we do have a pre-K program that has about 100 students in it. That gives us a really good sense. Almost every one of those students transitions into kindergarten for us. So we're grade center based. So our pre-K and kindergarten building reaches out to those institutions in the area that may be housing pre-K kids to find out if those kids might be moving over into kindergarten, or potentially from kindergarten in the first grade. And then we've got our both director of special ed and our emerging bilingual and pre-K kindergarten principal that spend a lot of time with families. So our goal here at Arbor Park is we don't want to know when your kid or your child is ready to walk in the door at age of 3. We want to know when they're born. We want to know when they're born because we want to see what the pattern is and be ready for that student when it does come to time for them potentially to be admitted into pre-K. That's a specific program where you have to. It really is driven towards low-income families and those families that potentially have special needs that may be identified early on. But our goal is to know our community at birth, and find out the best way to serve those kids before they even arrive within the district.
You're, at this point, as Lindsay's world is using a lot of either Section 611 or 619 IDEA funds, trying to figure out how to go out and get that population and say, please come see me. I want to see you. I want you to be my student. So now I'm going to ask one of the last questions, and it has to do with transfers and whether or not you're going to allow them to go online in the age of, the pandemic. They want to do an online, and they don't want to go to your school no more. They want to choose an online program that they want to do. And how do we ensure that they get the services if it's an online school you offer or another one? Lindsay, what do you see as some of the challenges when we see kids choosing that option and know they may be one of those high need students?
Yeah, I think going back to just family collaboration and communication is really important, but I also think making sure that the technology that they're using is accessible, and if they need assistive technology, that we still provide that. And I think I know it's probably a very difficult situation to try to reach students remotely and things and all that comes with that. But I think as an advocacy organization, we're pushing for more funding at the federal level, additional relief bills, to make sure that schools and districts have the resources that they need to get to those students who are remotely. And I think there may be a lot of students with disabilities that are remote and need additional supports and things like that. So I think That's one thing that we're seeing. But yeah, I think what I would say is that the technology, first and foremost, needs to be accessible to students with disabilities.
Cool. All right, Aaron, now it's your time to think, hey, in Brooklyn, we got everything. We got Wi-Fi. We can do anything a student wants. Why do you want to transfer? What's the issue with you with transfer?
Yeah, and so, as it relates to the pandemic, one thing that we focused on was understanding that there are going to be families that were going to choose to stay home in fear of contracting COVID-19. And so what we actually did was create three separate campuses, all run by Brooklyn Lab. One of the campuses was an in-person middle school. We also have an in-person high school, but we also created a virtual middle school and a virtual high school. And so what we wanted to do was not lose our students that we've worked so hard to get to grade level, or we worked so hard to get them to attend school. We made sure that there was a learning model that was going to be able to work for them. And there were some transfers that students, just wanted to go to a different school. And we've dealt with that, but the way that we've done that was really working with the accepting school and making sure that they had all of the information around that student. We set up meetings with their teachers, their social workers, their guidance counselors, to make sure that there was as seamless as possible transition of information so that they could pick up where we left off. Understanding that our students are our students until they graduate, high school, whether that's with us or with someone else.
Fabulous. I wish I could do what you're doing, Aaron. Okay, Brian, what's happening in the great state of Illinois?
Great is a subjective word, is it not? No, it's the great state of Illinois is doing well. We here in South Cook County, we've actually had more kids come into the district this year than we do typically. And I think that speaks to two things. One, the type of education and services that we offer all of our students, whether with a special education or emerging bilingual background or our general education students. Certainly some of that phenomena is there are parents making decisions, financial decisions, family decisions, because maybe if their private school is not in person, is that 5-figure cost for the same type of online access compared to a public education worth it for a period of time? So we've seen a handful of parents change from that perspective. We've seen more than a handful of folks move in. We're kind of at the tip of Southeast Cook County, where there's certainly many more low income areas and to the east and south of us. And we happen to be almost kind of like a bridge in terms of a community. It is a terrific community with immense support from the public and the overall community, with high levels of progressive education and history of meeting the needs of kids of all various backgrounds, colors, creeds, and beliefs. So we're fortunate for that perspective, but it's still, in the end, it's still a challenge because, I'm the budget guy. So, most budget guys start with no and maybe move to yes in a good scenario. When it's for kids, you always have to. But my first question always is, how is this impacting students? Whatever you're asking for is, how is this going to impact students? Because that's the ultimate goal and mantra of what we do in education. So we've just had to be flexible, like I mentioned earlier in one of our earlier questions, and find the best way to serve the needs of those kids that are in front of us and those kids and those families that are choosing. Just like Aaron said, we've got 2/3 of our families that have decided that the best education for them this year is not in person. And we respect that. And we find what their needs are on an individual basis, provide them with those needs, and then ensure that there's consistent follow-up from a social, emotional, and curriculum aspect, that just because they sit in front of a computer for 5 hours a day doesn't mean they're learning in the same way they would have learned in the room. But I do think, and I don't believe this is a bold statement, that education is changing. I think there's going to be a small percentage of our population that will demand public and private education to be in a remote setting consistently because it meets the needs of that specific student or their specific family. And we as educators, especially in the public realm, where we're using taxpayer dollars to pay for a major portion of what we do, to find a way to reach out to those families and those kids and still provide them with the type of education they would have received if they were inside of a 20 by 20 classroom.
Fantastic. Love it. So I'm going to end this by saying one of my favorite phrases, be involved, ask if you don't know. One of the challenges school business officials have is they tend to be in that little office on the side, their pocket protectors, and they don't get involved and understand some of the complexities of what it is that we have to do and what those principals need in that classroom, what that person or that teacher needs to serve that student. Kids are the reason why we're here. They are the picture of the future. So if our job is to ensure their success. So how can we do that? Well, sometimes that may mean that you take additional time to learn the law. In the state, great state of Oregon, I'll say, not Illinois, there was a little thing that happened this year as we went to this pandemic version, which is we can enroll and transfer certain students up to 3%, right? But then what we didn't know, that there was one little line in the state law that says that means I can say, hey, I can appeal it. So 15 of the people that I basically said you couldn't transfer appealed to the state because I didn't have my own online charter school or online program. Because I'm a small district, I have about 3,500 kids. So I didn't have one. The state appealed it and allowed them to do what they wanted. So get out there, know the law, because that was a piece of the law I missed, and I'll take that. But get involved and say that. Okay, now we passed our time by 1 minute, I think. Now, Aaron, I think it's now on you to educate us on some of the wonderful slides you have in Brooklyn and how you prepared your facilities. Thank you.
Yeah. Sharie, thank you very much. What we really wanted to do at Brooklyn Lab this year was give families the power of choice. And I often think about my 3 girls that, I'm responsible for being their parent and their educator. And what we wanted to make sure was that families chose whatever option was right for them. And so the mission of Brooklyn Lab is to really eliminate the achievement gap by preparing scholars with the academic foundation, digital literacy, and leadership skills necessary to succeed in college and professional life. And we're committed to serving the highest need students regardless of their academic level, English language proficiency, or disability. Meeting the needs of these students has continued to be our focus as we reimagined what return of school looks like in fall 2020. And we worked really, really hard to respond to the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier, creating 3 different options, or 2 options, a virtual option and a brick and mortar option, really was important to us, because I often think about, the powerful, the rich, the wealthy, the people that have the opportunity to do something different. Just because of your zip code or the amount of income you have, that shouldn't determine the quality of education that you receive or the options that you have. So we really worked hard to be able to provide that to the families of Brooklyn Lab. As we thought of this, we have 30 to 35% of our students are students who have IEPs, and we started to first craft how we would run schools, thinking about the students who didn't have IEPs. And then we were like, but then we have to do this for the students who do have IEPs. And what we realized is that if you prioritize the needs of the most vulnerable, it then creates a program that is suitable for all. And that's really important. And so if, looking at this visual, if you have this place where you have a cut in the curb, not only can someone with a wheelchair roll onto the sidewalk, but you also have people who are able-bodied who can walk onto the sidewalk with ease. And so that's the way that we really thought about designing our program, with the mindset that, we had to make sure that our program was inclusive, but in doing so, we looked at the most vulnerable and we were able to create a meaningful program for all. One of the things that we had to first do was make sure we understood some of the things that the pandemic created, and some of the fears that people had around the return to school. And we really wanted to minimize harm across learning models. And so we really had conversations with parents and faculty and community members. And these were the main things that they brought up, which was learning loss. You know, my child doesn't learn in this way. And it was something that parents really feared that would happen during these months. The social and emotional impact. You know, I read an article yesterday. My wife forwarded me an article, and I think it was talking about the school district of in Nevada, fifth largest school district, and they doubled their suicide rate for students in their school community. And so that's something that was really alarming to us, because the social disconnect is not something that students in today's day and age are used to. Although they're relying on technology more, that ability to have that hand on the shoulder, that support, that words of affirmation, we had to figure out how to do that during the pandemic. Reduced child abuse detection, right? We know that when students come to us, we're able to examine them, look at them, hug them. They're able to talk to us. And so in New York City, I could speak of, when the pandemic first hit, the first 3 months, ACS cases started to rise. The reporting of the lack of reporting of ACS cases was one that was alarming. But people, ACS workers were out in the field, and they would report that there's more abuse happening. There's other things happening, and being in such close confines for long periods of time, it's something that we were aware of and wanted to make sure we had the ability to address. And then nutritional insecurity. We tend to not, some people tend to not think about what schools actually provide. And it's not just a place where students go to learn, but it's a place where students get that social and emotional support, do have, adults that are looking after their well-being, but it's a place of shelter and food. And that's something that was a concern for us if students weren't coming to us in person. Parental employment loss. Families that, if we didn't have an additional option, would have no place to send their child, and then that would result in employment loss. On top of the employment loss that was bound to happen because businesses across the country are just shutting down. Lack of access to essential services, and obviously the risk of COVID-19. And so listening to our families, listening to our communities, we were able to understand what we were dealing with and plan against that. Next slide, please. One of our major focuses, because it was a concern around our facilities operation and our safety and well-being. And so we've created tools that really were geared towards organizations, schools that haven't yet opened, to be able to have these tools and resources that allowed us to, one, open ourselves, but also share our experiences with others. And it really talked about it, we engaged with design partners and with our school community. We secured an architect in residence, and we made sure we heard concerns and fears and frustrations, and integrated that feedback. And so these were the various tools that were all combined into one in our Back to Schools Facilities Toolkit that will make sure that it is available. We really thought long and hard around resources that would be focused on back to school for students with disabilities. So part of that was our Facilities Toolkit. We also created a program scheduling map. We created something called the Success Coaching Playbook, and then our Learner Identity and Agency Guidebook. So preventing the spread, which was, we were coming back on site, and so we really focused on face coverings, physical distance, hand hygiene, and vaccination. It's something that we're strongly encouraging for our communities. And a lot of that, working with primarily, Black and Brown communities, there's a lot of distrust in the medical community. And so we're spending a lot of time educating our staff, educating our families. We do weekly COVID-19 testing for staff and students, making sure that we're able to stop any kind of spread, right? And so there was all of these things that we made sure we put in place in order to allow for the safe reentry to our school building. And in thinking about containing the spread, we really had to rethink arrival. We really had to think about our procedures, redesigning pedestrian flow around the building, establishing contact eco-tracing systems. And so we've, in the picture on the far left, we built this, what we call front porch. And that's where we go through our screening process. And so what science has said is that if you're wearing a mask, another person's wearing a mask, and they're outside, there's a decreased chance of spread because you're in the open air. And so we have a screening process prior to getting into the building where we're asking all of our screening questions, we're taking temperature, and we're logging this information into a system to make sure we know who's exactly in our building, and knowing who's exactly in our building, if there was a chance of spread, we're able to nip that in the bud before it becomes a greater issue. We really focused on reconfiguring classrooms. And reconfiguring the classrooms, we wanted to make sure that we were thinking about socially distanced, paired rooms, small groups. And so we created a floor plan that allowed for flexibility. And here's some of those ideas and how we were thinking about reshaping and reconfiguring our classrooms. We really focused on success coaching, and I'm not going to go so deep into success coaching, but because of the concerns that we identified, social and emotional, family job loss, students who would have to be moved into group homes or homeless shelters, we created this model called success coaching, which we didn't have the budget or ability to hire these additional 12 social workers. So what we did was refocus priority, right? We focused on our teaching staff getting a caseload of 10 to 15 students and making sure that there was a built relationship in terms of a deeper understanding of what that child is experiencing during these hard times. And so we focused on building that relationship and building a meaningful connection, and then setting goals. What we've experienced at Brooklyn Lab is similar to what other school districts have experienced, is that, with the combination of remote learning, there are students who have found a way to try to go incognito for some time. And with that being said, it's our job to make sure that we cut down on chronic absenteeism. And so having goals set, making sure that we're putting these things into effect, which really focused on engagement and attendance, was really important. And then we had to make sure we were able to tell the story in multiple ways. And so we told the story in multiple ways through town halls, through our words, through visuals. And these things were really important for us, making sure that we're communicating across all of our communities. And we're really excited about being able to do that but that comes with challenges. And so we've identified, and I think the most important part in this process for us was really just listening and doing and making some of the best decisions we possibly can. I've been in education for 12 plus years as well. And one of the things that I try to tell people is this is brand new to me. I've never led through a pandemic. And so making sure that we're listening to insight in others has been truly important to us.
I think we got poll question number 3. Prioritizing the needs of the most vulnerable includes bringing them to the forefront of the conversation and creating an inventory of their challenges. Is that true or false? Great job, Aaron. Loved your slides.
Thank you.
Lots of people are going, please, could you send me that data?
We will make sure that we connect the folks with our information.
Give just a couple more seconds for everybody to answer the poll questions, and I'll share the results.
Wow, great. Great answer. I love it. So we're down to the last few minutes of this, and we've got any more Q&As that are out there. One of the questions that came up is, could you please explain all the Q&As and the abbreviations? I think we answered some of those. And there's some more of Erin's slides. So is there any of the group that you feel that you want to add the last few comments? I don't really have any more questions there in the chat. Oh, I got one question that just popped up. Just said it was very helpful. So we have one last poll question. Is it impossible to teach self-advocacy and self-determination without recognizing blank and blank in the classroom? Okay, do we have an answer to the last?
Yes, we do. I was going to share that with you. There we go. Here's your results.
All right. Equal. All right, there's no wrong answer when we provide services for students. I want to thank everybody. Today has been wonderful. Great panelists, Brian, Erin, Lindsay, and those people in the background, which is Gabrielle, Julie, and everybody. Thank you very much. It's been a great session. And if anything, please go out and make sure that you get involved. Thank you. Please be involved with ASBO. They're a great organization. And I thank everybody for attending this session.
Oh, you guys, thank you again. I just echo Sharie with, all the different perspectives, learning from Brian and Lindsay and Erin and even you, Sharie. The presentation includes more slides that we weren't able to get to, so those will be available within 2 to 3 business days after the session, ELA and from ASBO. So you can definitely visit these websites. We're at asbocintl.org, and Educating All Learners Alliance is at educatingalllearners.org. So thank you so much.